Hello and a warm welcome to everybody. We would like to wish everyone a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Jamie, and I'm one of the co-founders of Safeopedia. Safeopedia's mission is to support the EH&S professionals, operational folks, and any safety-minded individuals with free safety information, tools, and education. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to those dedicated professionals for the great work they do on a daily basis. Today, we're proud to present Top 5 Hearing Protection Considerations that you might not be thinking about. This Safeopedia webinar has been made possible by Moldex, a preferred manufacturer member of Safety Network. Safety Network demands excellence, so demand Safety Network. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you today's presenter, Bryan McWhorter. Bryan is a productivity expert and safety professional with over 10 years experience in implementing and teaching safety, leadership, and productivity tools. He gained much of his knowledge and experience through over 30 years as a supervisor, safety officer, and senior trainer in the manufacturing industry at the largest fluorescent lighting factory in the world. We've been extremely lucky to have Bryan working at Safeopedia for the last 3.5 years. We are also grateful to have Craig Smith join us for the Q&A session today. Craig is a marketing professional with nearly 20 years of experience. He has been with Moldex for 10 years, working within the marketing, project, and product management roles. He is a Los Angeles native who attended USC and graduated with emphasis in both marketing and the entrepreneur program. In his spare time, he is an avid CrossFitter and enjoys cooking, camping, and snowboarding. And just a small note, Bryan is not an employee of Moldex, like I mentioned. We are the lucky ones to have him here at Safeopedia. Now, we are very grateful to have you sit back, relax, and enjoy this presentation. With that, Bryan, please take it away.
Thanks, Jamie. And also, I'd love to thank Safety Network, Safeopedia, and as you mentioned, Moldex for making this information available. Hearing is very important, and through my experience, that's one of those things that we can definitely take for granted and really misjudge the danger of excessive noise. When I think of that old term, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. When it comes to our hearing protection, that pound of cure really doesn't exist. Often hearing damage from excessive noise is permanent. So that ounce of prevention is the only game in town. So very important. Okay, as Jamie mentioned, we're going to look at the top 5 hearing protection considerations that you might not be thinking about. And some really good considerations that will definitely help enhance your hearing program. We'll look at the role of no-roll foam earplugs. We'll look at independent versus manufacturers, self-tested NRR ratings. We'll discuss brief overview of PAR, personal attenuation rating testing. We'll look at giving workers a variety of suitable hearing protection, something very important. Again, what's comfortable for one may not be for others. And then lastly, we'll look at the relationship of sound levels and the duration of exposure. So important information. Let's lay a foundation, first of all, before we dive into those. It's very important to understand sound and the risk to damaging our hearing. So as I mentioned before, I found that this is one of those things that we often take for granted. And we need to have that epiphany come on to employees to understand the true dangers. And we need to understand our responsibilities, in compliance with organizations like EPA and OSHA. So let's look at the OSHA regulation first. The Hearing Conservation Amendment to OSHA Occupational Noise Exposure Standard 29 CFR 1910.95 requires that employers establish a hearing conservation program for employees whose noise exposure equal or exceed an 8-hour time-weighted average of 85 decibels or more. Now, decibel is a unit of measure that measures, the relative loudness that is expressed in the intensity of a sound wave. Again, sound comes at us in waves. And if you look at that diagram of the ear, our ears are very delicate and made of different components. If you see that cochlea there, that part that looks like the back of a snail, that's where those sound waves end up. We'll come back to that here in a moment. There are 2 types of noise that we can be exposed to, and we need to understand both. That first one is that loud impulsive noise. This would be like a thunderclap, a crash of a cymbal, or the loud noise from a firearm. If we're over 100, 140 and higher, we definitely have the possibility of hearing damage from that one-time event. And to give you an idea of what produces that type of sound, almost every firearm is capable of producing 140 decibels or louder. Even a small 22 caliber rifle can produce noise at 140 decibels. And when you look at your bigger bore rifles and pistols, they can produce sounds up to 175 decibels. So again, extreme loud amounts of noise, even just for a microsecond, is enough to cause damage to our hearing. The other type is that steady exposure. If you look at the picture there, you look at a crowded intersection with lots of people in a city, and typically you've got around 85 decibels is the level of sound there. Again, exposure to that level for 8 hours or more can cause permanent hearing loss. And we often take that for granted. We just don't realize that our hearing is in danger. So getting that light to come on, that epiphany for employees and workers, is very important. So, how does our hearing get damaged from excessive noise? Well, if we go back to that cochlea, that small snail shell looking device, or not device, component in our ear. Inside it, we have fluid, and we have 18,000 tiny hair cells that basically pick up those sound waves. So if you look over here at the healthy side, so imagine that as each one is kind of like blades of grass that are upright. And as those sound waves brush across them, they create electronic signals in the brain that records that and deciphers it as sound. Well, with excessive noise, those can become damaged and look like this. It makes it very difficult for them to register those sound waves. And once those are damaged to that level, there's no repair. So again, we need to really up our level of understanding the potential to damage our hearing. We all want to be able to hear our grandchildren when we get old, and we don't want excessive noise to take, some of our lifestyle away from us. So let's look at that hearing conservation program. And I don't want you to be, overwhelmed by this. The components of a hearing conservation program are pretty straightforward, and I've helped put together several of these. So the components they begin with that noise contour study. And anything that you're dealing with in terms of safety begins with a hazard assessment. So, you've got those three components: the hazard, the risk, and the control measure. Well, what determines whether or not you need a hearing conservation program is if you have the hazard of excessive noise. Again, as by OSHA's mandate, if there's 85 decibels or higher that people are exposed to, or that 8-hour time-weighted average, you have to have a hearing conservation program in place. Okay, for that noise contour study, you just need to use a decibel meter and take measurements of the sound levels that workers are exposed to from the various operations that they're doing or around. This can be from construction equipment, manufacturing equipment, power tools, or anything that's producing noise, but we need to understand what workers are exposed to. You can even hire third parties to come in and figure people with decibel meters that will measure the sound that they're exposed to through the course of their shift. But a noise contour study needs to take place. Then you also need to redo that anytime there's a change to the work environment, introduction of new processes or new equipment. And again, this is important because this is that hazard assessment. This is verifying whether or not there is a need for protection. Okay, that second bullet, employee training for hearing conservation. As I mentioned, this is one of those things that I have found, in years of working in manufacturing environments, that people often take their hearing for granted. We all have that favorite radio station of ours, that WIFM, what's in it for me? When you have a rule like you have to wear hearing protection, as long as it remains a rule, you can count on people, probably disregarding it at times. They need to have that epiphany of how important it is to wear that hearing protection. So the training, like what the information we're going over today does that, where they understand the risk, they understand the danger, then they'll use the control measure. But if they don't really understand that risk and how important that control measure is, it's very easy to disregard it. Remember, they're there to do the work, to get the thing done that they are being paid to do. So that hearing consideration might not be even something they give a whole lot of thought to. Hearing protection provided if required due to excessive noise exposure. Okay, again, if you have that hearing conservation program, you've determined that there is the risk of danger of losing hearing from excessive noise, then the employer has to provide hearing protection. And they have to provide a variety of different types of hearing protection. And we'll talk more about that later. But again, what is comfortable for one person may not be for someone else. The annual hearing tests performed, you need to do annual hearing tests every year to verify that your hearing conservation program is effective. So you have someone who's a new employee, that first time they do that hearing test, that's going to establish a baseline. Then every year after, as they're wearing the hearing protection, you're going to do an annual testing to verify that there is not a significant shift in hearing loss to where it could actually even be an OSHA recordable injury. We want to verify that the hearing protection employees are using is working, and they deserve to know that. Okay, so we've laid the foundation of what the threat is in terms of exposure to loud noises can cause significant hearing loss, and it could be permanent. So let's look at those 5 hearing protection considerations. And I love what Moldex put together here. These will definitely enhance any hearing conservation program, and there are things that often we do overlook. Number 1, the no-roll foam earplugs, and there are lots of different types out today, like glide foam. And I admit, when I was a safety manager and safety trainer going out onto the floor, these are the type of earplugs that I preferred. I kind of like the idea of not having to roll it up, just pulling it up on the ear, inserting the earplug, and off I went. If you are working in a construction or a manufacturing environment, then you're dealing with most likely gloves and dirty hands. Again, unless you're the drummer of a rock band, most likely manufacturing construction sites are just dirty by nature. So again, they've got the gloves on, started the shift, putting in the ears plugs, no big deal. But after that, what we want to do is avoid getting those earplugs dirty and inserting them and maybe risking ear infections, which are painful and can also damage hearing. So we don't want to inadvertently add another contributing factor to possibly damaging our hearing. So these are something, if you don't have no roll earplugs, I would definitely make some of these available. Again, there's something about, we all love those hacks where we can kind of skip a step or, eliminate one step in something. And the no-roll earplugs do that. So they're comfortable and they're easy to apply. And again, just something that you definitely want to give some thought to. Okay, independent versus manufacturer's self-tested NRR ratings. Okay, that NRR rating is very important. It's important because it indicates the functionality of a device and its ability, or the ability of that device to protect hearing from noisy environments. So we're counting on that NRR. When we put in that earplug, and here we'll say it's got a rating here of 33 decibels, we're counting on it protecting us from excessive noise in that environment. So, when we're looking at independent versus manufacturer, almost always what we're looking for is some verification or validation from an independent outside source to verify that what the manufacturer says is accurate. And this is something that I've always looked for, and I've always kind of recommended in others. It's typical for manufacturers to, obviously have laboratories and look at, verify, what they're doing and creating is, meeting the levels for whatever standards, they say it does. But, it is also a great idea, most manufacturers, do this anyway, of having an outside independent lab verify, that they are meeting the standards or the levels that they say they are. So it's kind of nice having that outside stamp of approval from a different company. Now, just because your NRR is, say, 33 decibels, like it says on the slide here, doesn't mean you're getting actually that much protection. Remember, when those tests were done, they were done in a lab under perfect conditions with that person putting that earplug in correctly. So we're doing some assumptions. What is a better solution is actually those PAR tests. This takes the assumption out of the equation to where you actually have some hard data. And that's that personal attenuation rating. There are programs like Fit Check Solo that take the guesswork, as I mentioned, out of matching the correct hearing protection with that known noise exposure. So this is awesome. They can take and test the effectiveness of the actual earplug that the worker is wearing that day, the way it's fit, the way they're using it. And they can also remove the earplug and test the sound, that's outside there. They can test, do 3 to 7 frequencies and generate a Fit Check Solo personal attenuation rating that actually gives you true information. So again, we're just not making an assumption based on what we know of the sound they're being exposed to and what that NRR rating is. And as I mentioned, where workers tend to take our hearing for granted, we're thinking of getting the work done through the course of the day. We need to have that epiphany that takes wearing hearing protection from a rule to something that is important for me to do. So that personal attenuation rating from like a Fit Check Solo testing, they can test and measure the earplugs, almost any type, disposable, reusable, twist in. They can measure the attenuation using the actual earplugs worn that day. So when you talk about employees or workers having that epiphany, they're not just going by that rating. They can actually see what that hearing protection that they're wearing and the way they're wearing it, they can see what it's doing. So that really helps that light to come on. Another thing I like about these is I often talk in productivity about leading and lagging indicators. When you do that hearing test, that annual one, those are lagging indicators. Those let you know how well your program is doing. This is a leading indicator. Those parts tell you, real world what's going on right now. So if you do your PAR and it's showing that you're getting protection in your knee, that's a leading indicator that when you do that annual hearing check, you're probably going to be okay. We use our leading indicators to dictate or, give us an indication of what's going to happen with those lagging indicators. So again, big fan of the PAR, something to definitely consider. Okay, number 4, supplying workers with a variety of suitable hearing protection. Again, this is something that a lot of people don't realize that is a mandate by OSHA. If you have several different workers and you've got a hearing conservation program, again, what's comfortable to me might not be comfortable to Craig or Jamie or anyone else that's working in that environment. If I go to the largest factory or manufacturing environment that I worked in when we were fully staffed, it was around 500 employees. The decibel level near the equipment on the factory floor was around 90 to 95 decibels, and some departments actually higher than that. So when it came to earplugs, we actually kept a variety of somewhere between 5 and 10 different types of earplugs, on site all the time, so that people could find something that was comfortable for them. Again, if someone's working 8 hours or 12 hours, we want them to be able to focus on work and not deal with how uncomfortable their ears are from a plug that's stuck in them. And we also provide a variety of earmuffs. Well, it was interesting when I first started looking at hearing protection and dealing with hearing conservation. One of the things that I didn't realize was that usually earplugs provide the higher NRR ratings. I really did not know that. Usually they do a better job than the earmuffs, although some people really just prefer the earmuffs. And we actually had one department where the sound was so loud, we had people wear the earplugs with earmuffs over them, and you might have an environment that is like that. But again, just wrapping up with this item here, number 4. Again, if you have a hearing conservation program, you do have to provide a variety of earplugs, different types of hearing protection for people to wear. Again, I know of people that found that one type of earplug that was just very comfortable, and the others really just annoyed them. It's very difficult for them to focus with that, just bugging them in their ear. So again, very personal. Okay, again, I want to take a moment here and just thank Molex for providing this information. I love how this presentation was put together. We start out by laying that foundation of how important our hearing is, and people do not realize how easily hearing is lost. And we're kind of wrapping up here by, again, looking at how loud is too loud. Remember, this is that risk. Everything that we do in safety comes down to that equation of what's the hazard? So in this case, it's loud noise. What's the risk? It's hearing loss, which, as I mentioned, is often permanent when it comes to loss from excessive noise. And what's that control measure? And that's, hearing protection. So that ounce of prevention is really the only game in town when it comes to our hearing. And, understanding those decibels, when we talk about the sound scale, as decibels go up, it's nonlinear. So going from 80 to 90 is not the same increase as, say, going from 90 to 100. It's actually exponential. So say being exposed to 65 decibels for 8 hours, okay, you'd be fine, but that doesn't mean you can spend 4 hours at 130 decibels and be okay. At 130 decibels, you're only talking about a matter of seconds before the potential for permanent hearing loss is there. So we need to really understand that. Again, it's hard to have our spider sense go off for those dangers that we don't just really see, especially when workers are used to working in a certain environment. So again, we need to do a good job of training and showing them, what that potential danger is. Give you an idea when it comes to sounds. We're usually in an environment where there is some noise. You're almost never in an environment that is soundless. A whisper is around 20 decibels. Basic conversation is around 60 decibels. If you're talking in a crowd, not a cloud, in a crowd, you might raise your voice around 70 decibels. Although I do know some people whose conversation, I swear, idles at 70. Not the point. The point is, as you get louder, again, we have the greater potential for danger. A large truck, 90 decibels. Lawnmower, 90 decibels. I've noticed in the last few years, I see more and more people wearing hearing protection while mowing their lawn. Awesome. That's great to see. Again, forklifts are around 91 decibels. Now we're getting up there when you get around, say, chainsaws, and I love looking at those two together. A chainsaw is about the same as a nightclub. If you're in a nightclub and the average decibel level is 105 decibels, 5 minutes exposure to that is enough to possibly cause permanent hearing damage. So again, we just don't realize this. I've been a lifelong drummer, and I brought home my decibel meter from work and had my wife measure my drumming. And it was, I never realized how loud the drums were. A crash of the cymbal was over 110 decibels, and almost all the drumming was over 100 decibels. So again, we don't realize what we're being exposed to. Get a passenger jet, 120, jackhammer, 130. And you can go on Google and look at lots of different levels of sound put out from different things. But again, we can be around these things. And as I said, our spider sense doesn't tingle, doesn't go off. We don't realize that we're damaging those hair-like cells in our cochlea and can really be hurting our lifestyle later in life by having good hearing. So with that, we'll go ahead and take some questions.
Great, thank you, Bryan. Yeah, the sometimes loud noises, you just don't realize how permanent it is. I personally have tinnitus, and I don't wish that on anybody. And it is from the younger days and car stereos and that kind of thing. And it's yeah, you just can't go back in time. So please wear your hearing protection and every time. So
I didn't mean to laugh when you said you had tinnitus. I do too. And I think it's from all my exposure. I always tease people that tinnitus is your own special noise that only you can hear. And same, I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So just a quick reminder, get your questions in. We've got a few rolling in, no pun intended, for this first question here. So yeah, thanks again, Bryan. And Craig, we've got you on the line. If you want to just test your microphone that we can hear you, that'd be great.
Testing 1, 2. This is Craig.
You betcha. Other than the tinnitus, you sound great. All right. So we'll start off with Jason's question. Jason asks, what is the NRR for a no-roll foam earplug?
Well, like like any earplugs, there's various types out there with various NRRs. The one that Moldex makes, which is the one that I can speak of, and was the one that was on the slide in this presentation, is called Glide Foam, and the NRR for that earplug is 30, and it is, to my knowledge, that I'm aware of, the highest independently tested. All Moldex hearing protection, 100% of it is completely independently tested by a third-party lab, and it is the highest independently tested NRR for a no-roll earplug Glide Foam, which is 30.
All right, thank you, Craig. There's a couple questions here. There's Jillian and Maggie, and they're kind of the same. So Maggie asks, where can you get a PAR program? And then Jillian asks, what is the cost of a PAR testing system, like a Fit Check Solo, and where do we get one? So similar questions. Thank you, Maggie and Jillian.
Good questions. So the costs for the system, they're pretty sophisticated systems. Fit Check Solo, I know, you need the specialized earmuffs and some specialized software that runs on a laptop. The cost can be quite high. Moldex owns several of the units and maintains a loan out program for some of our customers, for qualified customers. So I would definitely start with getting in touch with your local Moldex rep, which you could email me and I can put you in touch with them, or you can go onto our website and find a local Moldex rep, because it may be that we could provide it to you for free to do your PAR testing, and then we'll take it back and give it back to you when you need to do it again.
Well, I know that fits my budget perfectly. Thank you. So thanks, Jillian and Maggie, for your question. Cher has a question. If an independent sound survey revealed our environment was less than 85 decibels, time-weighted average, except for one task that was at 95 decibels, can we require hearing protection only for this task, even though it's not done frequently?
That is a good question. That Brian, unless you have some idea of that, I would have to get some further input on that.
Yeah, actually, that's not a that's a very common scenario in a lot of manufacturing environments. So what you want to do is put in your rules when that power tool or that equipment is put in use, that they put in hearing protection. So yeah, that's again, when you go to your hazard assessment, part of the and this is pretty typical for dealing with lots of things. If I'm going to handle glass, I'm going to put on my cut resistant gloves. If I'm going to handle a grinder, I'm going to put on my face shield. So again, if they're handling this equipment with a noise decibel level higher than 85, then you know what? They're going to have to put in hearing protection as part of their PPE for using this tool. So yeah, just put that in your rules and you're fine.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. All right, Ken has a question here. Ken asks, what earplug should I use to protect against the blast from arc flash? Great question, Ken.
So the blast from arc flash, as Brian had said earlier, is that first type of noise, the impulse noise, and Moldex makes an earplug called Battle Plugs, which was actually originally developed for the U.S. military, that can be worn in either an open or a closed position while in ear. So you can open it to hear conversations or low noises, or commands, or if you're, I guess, working in the electrical situation where there is not loud noises. However, in the open position, if there is a loud blast, such as an arc flash or an explosion, gunfire, it has an impulse filter built into the earplug body that will attenuate down that blast, so that you don't lose your hearing. if you're in continuous noise situations, then you would always want to wear that earplug in the closed position, because if you know that there's going to be sound, you want to protect your hearing. But in the open position, it's intended to attenuate down impulse noises, and it's called battle plugs.
Cool. Thanks, Craig. Here's an interesting question from Denise. Does doubling up on hearing protection sum the two NRR ratings together? So an earplug and an ear muff, perhaps?
No, it is not one plus the other. So if you have a 30 ear muff and a 33 earplug, you are not getting 63 NRR. There is an equation, and Brian, maybe you know it. I don't off the top of my head, of how to determine what type of protection you're getting from dual protection like that. But I know for a fact that it is not one plus the other.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, it kind of surprised me. And like I mentioned, we had a compressor room in the large manufacturing facility I was in where we did mandate that people wore earplugs and ear muffs. But I was surprised that when I worked out, the math that they say to use, again, the ear muffs on top of the plugs only just dropped it like between 5 and 10 more decibels. So I was really surprised. What I would suggest, again, look at the manufacturer's ratings, and usually they can give you an idea on the equation for both. But yeah, it is not, it's just like Craig said, it's not a deal of, adding the both up. That's not quite right.
Great. Thanks, you guys. Let's see. Tucker has a question here. I have seen advertisements for moisturizing earplugs. Does the moisturizer increase the risk of ear infection?
Okay, so you have seen advertisements for Soothers, which is a Moldex product, the first and only moisturizing earplug. The intention of this earplug is for workers with dry ears, maybe people who wear foam earplugs that it causes them to have dry ears, and this is an earplug that will hopefully help them out with their dry ear issues. It does not increase the risk of ear infection. What would increase the risk of ear infection is if you were to roll down Soothers without first washing your hands, without having, and that's the same for any foam roll down earplug, which is part of the reason that we had talked about the no roll foam earplugs. But if you roll down a foam earplug with dirty hands or gloves, or you get the earplug dirty, so you don't wash your hands first, then you do have an increased risk of ear infection.
Great, thank you, Craig. Yes, I've also seen the advertisements for the Soothers. Very interesting.
I'm glad.
Yeah, well, that's
I'm doing my job.
Yeah. Let's see here. Sherry has a question. Do we need to include the worker in a hearing conservation program if they use the tool that that goes above 85 decibels for just once a week during the spring and summer months? Should they be included in that hearing conservation program?
Yeah, it should definitely be considered for sure. If the one tool, depending on what it is, as Brian said in the presentation, depending on the level of sound coming from that one tool, the amount of time that they can be exposed without risking damaging their hearing may be only a matter of seconds. So even if it's once a week, even if it's once a year, if the sound is loud enough, then the duration of time can be only a matter of seconds, and so it should definitely be considered.
Yeah, and I agree with Greg. Good question.
Thanks, you guys. And Sherry just clarified it's a lawnmower. So. All right, here's a question from Linnea. Hope I'm saying that right. Do you have any thoughts on noise reducing headphones? That's the end of it. So if Craig or Brian, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, go for it, Craig. I have no experience with those, so I'm kind of wondering about this one too.
Yeah. Well, so if we're just talking about passive headphones or earmuffs, then those they work very well. They can be, they're easy to fit, and because there is no roll it down or anything like that, you just put them on. They can't be anything. If you wear glasses, you don't want the temple of your glasses to interfere with the seal on the side of your head of the earmuff. But they are definitely an effective hearing protection method. If we're talking about electronic earmuffs or noise canceling earmuffs, Molex does not make electronic earmuffs, so I wouldn't be able to speak on those.
All right, fair enough. Dan has a question here. What is NRR and how should it be practically applied or interpreted? Thanks, Dan.
NRR stands for noise reduction rating, and it is there is a test done to all hearing protectors over various frequencies. I don't remember exactly how many off the top of my head, and several different people within a test group. And then based on the attenuation that those people receive and the standard deviation between those people, there's a formula that is applied to determine what the NRR is. And that can those tests, as Brian said, are often done during testing by the manufacturer as they're developing a product. We do our own in-house as well, but ultimately Moldex hearing protection is all the NRRs that you see on the box and the attenuation data that you see on the box is all conducted by an independent third party called Kevin Michael and Associates.
And maybe Craig, we can put a link to their website on the follow-up, if that's all right.
Sure.
Awesome. All right, maybe either one of you could answer this one. Dan asks, how do OSHA requirements compare to international standards?
Brian, do you have any experience with international standards?
I was talking to Jamie about this earlier. That's a great question. It really is. And here I worked for an international company where I've helped establish safety programs in China and Mexico, Canada, and Europe. And unless I knew there was something really mandated different, usually the OSHA standard was pretty close or the same to where we just went by it. I said, unless we were dealing with something where I knew there was a different standard that I needed to follow. But what I always tell safety managers or safety professionals is wherever you're at, again, and this is the world we live in today, we deal with, keeping people safe, and then we also deal with compliance. So, look at whatever agencies that are the governing safety agencies for where you live. If it's OSHA, go to the OSHA website. If it's, Canadian, go to their website. But, this information is something you need to look at and verify so that you are compliant. So it's pretty easy, just wherever you're at, whoever the governing body is, if you have questions, go to their official information and make sure you're compliant. So yeah, I know I gave you kind of a long-winded answer, but again, great question.
Great, thanks, Brian. Let's see. We've only got a few questions left here. So yeah, if you have a question, get them in. There's 3 right now on the board. So if you've got one, make sure you get it in. Thank you. So let's see. Marileen, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. She asks, you mentioned earplugs will almost always provide greater protection than ear muff. Is it only if the PAR testing is done and we know for sure that the earplugs are worn properly? Good question.
If I understand the question correctly, not necessarily. So the highest NRR for an earmuff that Moldex makes is 30 decibels. The NRR of 30. And I think that this is true for other manufacturers as well. The highest for a roll down foam earplug, which is the highest that you can NRR that you can achieve is with a roll down foam earplug. And so Moldex makes several that have an NRR of 33. So a roll down foam earplug is going to be your highest level of protection. And so whether you do PAR testing or not, where the PAR testing would come into play is you'll often see people with foam roll down earplugs, and they're put in sideways or sticking halfway out of their ears, or they don't roll them down far enough to insert them properly. And in those cases, they are certainly not getting the full NRR that is measured, and PAR testing would help to show them visually that what kind of protection they actually are getting when they are inserting them incorrectly.
Great, thanks, Craig. Sherry has a question. What is the NRR for an earplug that doesn't need to be rolled down?
Again, so that I think you're thinking of the first point that we made on the no roll foam earplugs, and Glide Foam, which is the Moldex no roll foam earplug, is NRR of 30.
Great, thanks, Craig.
I'll also just mention that reusable earplugs also don't need to be rolled down. Kind of by their very nature, they're not made of foam, and they would vary in NRR depending on the earplug. The highest that I've seen, and I think the highest that exists for a reusable earplug, is NRR 27.
Great. Let's see. Conrad has a question. What is the life expectancy on Moldex Glide earplugs? Thanks, Conrad.
The life expectancy. Well, I think if in the package they'll last. There is no expiration date on earplugs in the package, so you could keep them around for quite a while. Once you take them out of the package and start using them, they are meant to be a disposable earplug. And as you're looking at your earplugs, they're not washable. For example, we do make several types of earplugs that are washable, but that's not one of them. So if you're using the earplug and it gets dirty with earwax or any other contaminants, then it's generally a good idea to throw them away and start with a new pair, just to avoid the risk of ear infection.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, Bill has a question that kind of touches on that a little bit. He's asking, the no-roll plugs are perfect for the oil and gas sector, compared to roll earplugs. And Craig, you just mentioned, washing no-roll certain models of no roll plugs. Have you guys ever done like a cost benefit analysis? The no roll plugs are more expensive, but the total cost of ownership. Have you guys done those studies at all? Bill, I hope I'm not butchering your question too badly here.
I'm not exactly sure what the question is there, but it I think it depends on the habits of the employees probably. If you're using like a reusable earplug, for example, but the employees are throwing them out like they're a disposable earplug, then for sure your hearing protection program overall, the costs are going to go up. If we're talking about a no-roll foam earplug versus a roll-down foam earplug, which is the no-roll foam earplug is going to be a little bit more expensive, then really the question is it's more of a question of comfort and protecting your employees. If they're able to get a better fit with a no-roll foam earplug, or if they're able to put them in without, if their hands are dirty, without having to go to the bathroom and wash their hands and all that kind of stuff, then you're saving time. You're helping to save them from ear infection, and so the benefit probably well outweighs the cost there.
Great, thanks, Craig. Here's an interesting question. So for reusable, washable earplugs, what do you recommend washing them with? Thanks, Sherry.
Just regular soap and water. They are generally made out of either TPE or silicone, and you can just wash them with regular soap and water right in the sink of the bathroom, and let them air dry.
And do you know how long and maybe you touched on this already, but do you know how long approximately they can last?
I think it would depend on the individual use, and just the individual environments. I don't think that we've done any kind of studies on how long they can last. I think it's a very individual basis type thing.
Yeah, interesting. It reminds me of like a fall harness, or even a respirator, things like that, where before you wear it, you do an inspection. Craig or Brian, do either of you have experience with inspecting your earplugs for maybe like if they're foam, are they torn, are they dirty? Is there a best practice around that, maybe in the job hazard analysis?
Actually, for my experience, you just nailed it, Jamie. Is doing any PPE you want to inspect before using, even those earplugs, or especially the ones that you're reusing. If you're washing them, if they're starting to lose their form from excessive wear, then yeah, it's time to grab another pair. So just a basic inspection. Craig, you got anything to add?
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, it's just doing a quick inspection before you put them in. If you see any kind of tears or deformities, then for sure, throw them away and get a new pair, because the intention is as they were designed. So if they're deformed in any way or torn, then they aren't giving you exactly the protection that was intended.
Great, thanks you guys. And Craig and Brian and Craig, you both didn't touch on this, and I don't know if Moldex manufactures these or not, but what do you think of personal molded earplugs?
So Moldex does not make personal molded earplugs, and I personally have never had an opportunity to try one. Brian, being a musician, maybe you have, but I do know that in general the NRR that you achieve with custom molded earplugs is lower than like for example, a foam roll down or even like a foam push in earplug. But I haven't had much experience with them myself.
Yeah, actually, in the large environment I was in, well, one year we did have a group come in and make molded earplugs for the entire, population of our workforce. And I'll be honest, they did not work as good for us, and were not as comfortable as just the earplugs that we're talking about today. So we tried it once, and we pretty much abandoned it. The ones that I had actually were comfortable for me, and I did use them for quite a while. But overall, it just didn't work. I think again, you're talking about something that our comfort level to make sure that something is working, so we're getting the protection we need. So yeah, I think earplugs and muffs like we're talking about today, again, just going by my experience, tend to do better. And again, totally my opinion based on a one-time event of using them.
Yeah, thanks, you guys. Dan has it's maybe less a question and an interesting point. And either Bryan or Craig, maybe if you could elaborate a little bit on this, if you have any experience. Dan is saying, what about the wearer aging and the fact that physiological changes take place? So as a person ages, if their ears change shape, that kind of thing. Bryan, do you have any experience with that?
Well, when it comes to that annual testing that's verifying that your hearing conservation program is working, they're going to take that into account. So they're going to take into account your aging as a factor, but that still shouldn't cause that a significant hearing shift that would say that the hearing conservation program or this person's been exposed to a lot of noise. But that's again why that person's gonna, when you do your hearing test, you're also gonna fill out, give information to where, if your hobbies include, juggling chainsaws near a gun range while playing the drums, that's all got to be taken in as factors. But yeah, age is usually something that they'll factor in.
Is the hearing conservation program, do they test every single worker in let's say a factory, like every single worker that can have potential exposure?
In the programs I put together, no. It really goes by whether or not they have to wear hearing protection as PPE. So we'll say one of the last places that I helped create a hearing conservation program from, they only had 2 departments where the noise levels were such where people had to wear hearing protection. So we had annual testing just for those 2 departments. There were like 5 departments in this organization. And so it was only about 25% of the workforce was under their hearing conservation program.
Interesting. And then are any earplugs, do they come in different sizes, Craig? Or is it one size fits all?
No, they do come in different sizes. And depending on the model of the earplug, they may come in more or less. I know that Moldex makes a foam roll down earplug, one called Small Meteors, which is intended for workers with small ear canals, or women, or any worker really with the small ear canals. Within the earplug that I mentioned before, Battle Plugs, which has the impulse protection filter, we actually make 4 sizes of that: extra small, small, medium, and large. So it depends on the model, but they do come in different sizes, and that again goes to the point, I think it was number 4, about the need for a variety of hearing protectors, just because that could be a part of the variety, is having some smaller sized earplugs, so that if a hearing protection is comfortable, then the employee will be more likely to wear them. and that's really the end goal, is to get the employee to wear them and wear them correctly. And so it may be that you need to provide some smaller sized earplugs for your workers with smaller ear canals.
Great, thanks, Craig. Julie is asking, you talked about a noise contour study. What is that, and how do I do one?
Hey, there are two different ways, two different approaches that I've used in the places I were at. And one, I always had a decibel meter, so I could go around and actually measure the noise with the work being done. So in other words, if I knew equipment put out noise that could potentially be at 85 decibels or louder and expose workers to that, then I measured that noise and I recorded it. So another way to do this, and again, it's one that I use quite often, is we had a third-party group come in, and this was the same group that would do our atmospheric testing, testing for dust and things like this. And they could put decibel meters on the workers that would actually record the sound levels that they were being exposed to through the course of their shift. But either way, remember, all you're doing is you're validating that that hazard exists. So if you can use a decibel meter and you're recording the noise when work is being done, again, you're establishing whether or not that hazard exists where you need hearing protection. So it's really, quite simple, but you need to establish it under normal working conditions and then redo it anytime there's a change. So that, again, that's your qualifier for whether or not you need that hearing protection or a hearing conservation program, in total. Craig, you got anything to add to that?
No, that sounds right. And I mean, well, the only other thing that I would mention is just there are several different methods you could. Most of the time, you're measuring the noise in a given situation or a given area with a dosimeter, and those can be rented, and there's types that you can attach to the employee. You can have it in a general area. And so those are other ways that that you can do that study of the actual noise that the employee is subjected to.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. That's right.
Thanks, you guys. Craig, I remember like from the respirator webinar a long time ago, I know Moldex will go in and do respirator train the trainer fit testing.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe Bryan or Craig, how does one go about, establishing a hearing conservation program or even this noise contour study? Are there things out there, or does Moldex provide that service, or your distribution network, do they provide it? Either one of you, if you could talk a little bit about how one would go about starting all that.
Well, sorry, I know that the Moldex does help as far as establishing a hearing conservation program. For sure, we can help you out with that, and making sure that it's an OSHA compliant program, and help you in determining what type of hearing protection that you need in your given situation. And any Moldex representative would be able to help you out with that. And again, you can either contact me. My email is on the screen, or go to our website. Then, in addition to that, there's many companies out there that can come in and do these noise contour studies. And Bryan, you might know of some specifically, or.
Actually, I love that you chimed in there, Craig. Most of my experience, again, I'm not a hearing expert. I love that you're taking most of these, Craig. My experience is more as the end user, the safety coordinator, And so what I would do is, just like the questions you guys are asking, I would go to the Craigs of the world. I would go to my distributors, or the people to help validate that I'm doing the things that I need to do. So yeah, I'd call upon the experts. And that's one of the things I do love about safety in general is, the people that deal with safety are always glad to help you to make sure that you're meeting all the requirements needed to keep your people safe. So again, I would rely on companies like Moldex now to make sure that I was, covering my bases and doing the things that I needed to do.
Awesome. All right, well, that looks like we are at the end of the questions and just past the top of the hour. Bryan, any final remarks?
I'd like to thank Safeopedia Safety Network and Moldex for, again, making this webinar possible and providing the great information. Again, like I said, there's something wonderful about safety to where everyone pulls together to keep people safe. And thank you, everyone who tuned in for this. Again, I realize how busy everybody is, so I very much appreciate your time and your attention that you gave us for this subject.
Greg, anything final remarks from you?
No, I echo Bryan's thanks to Safeopedia, of course, for putting this all together, Safety Network, and just a really big thanks to you, Bryan, for presenting this webinar. Your expertise is really appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you, Bryan, for again, your experience and your expertise. Craig, really appreciate you jumping on to ask questions. Really appreciate everyone taking the time. Thank you, Safety Network. Thank you, Moldex. Without you guys, this webinar wouldn't happen. Biggest thanks goes to the audience. Without the audience, none of this would even be possible. So we really, really appreciate your support, all your questions. Thank you so much. You're helping us keep this information free for everybody. So I would like to invite everyone to have a great weekend. And July 1st and July 4th are coming up, Canada Day, Independence Day. So have a great long weekend if you're taking one, or a great vacation. And we'll talk to everyone on the next webinar. Take care and stay safe.